Emily's mother had been in a relationship with a man named David for over 5 years. After divorcing her previous husband, she worked hard to raise her 3 children on her own. David, too, had gone through a divorce. And earlier this summer, he moved in with Emily's family to start a new life together. From the beginning, their blended family seemed to get along well, and David quickly took on the role of a stepfather. Emily, being the middle child, found herself growing close to him. He was kind to her, often helping with schoolwork or chatting about everyday life. Since Emily trusted him, she thought nothing of their bond. She and David would sometimes watch movies together late into the night, and there were times when they would even share a bed or take baths together, something she saw as a sign of their close family dynamic rather than anything inappropriate. Her mother, busy with work and taking care of household responsibilities, didn't question it either. For a while, life in their new household felt stable, and Emily hoped that this arrangement would finally bring her mother happiness after years of struggling alone. However, what seemed like a peaceful family life soon took a dark turn. One night, while Emily was asleep, she woke up to find David touching her in ways that made her uncomfortable. Confused and scared, she didn't know how to react before he forced himself on her. From that night on, their relationship changed forever. The encounters continued in secret, and she found herself trapped in a situation she couldn't escape from. David still maintained his relationship with Emily's mother, pretending that everything was normal while also continuing to take advantage of Emily whenever he found an opportunity. She felt helpless, unable to tell anyone, fearing that speaking up would destroy the fragile balance of her family. She didn't want to hurt her mother, who had finally found happiness, nor did she want to bring shame upon herself. As weeks passed, she tried to push her feelings aside and convince herself that everything would be fine. But when her period was late and a pregnancy test confirmed her worst fears, Emily's world crumbled. Now, faced with the reality of carrying David's child, she was left with a terrible choice, one that would change her life forever. Emily had been feeling off for weeks. At first, she told herself it was just stress. After all, she had been dealing with so much. But when her period didn't come, a deep fear crept into her heart. She tried to ignore it, hoping that her body was just reacting to everything she had been through. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just late. But as the days passed and her symptoms became more noticeable, nausea in the mornings, fatigue that wouldn't go away, she couldn't ignore the possibility any longer. One afternoon, when no one was home, she bought a pregnancy test from a drugstore on the other side of town. She didn't want to risk running into anyone she knew. She took the test in the bathroom, hands trembling as she waited for the result. When she saw the 2 pink lines appear, her stomach dropped. Pregnant, she felt like she couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't supposed to happen. Her hands gripped the edge of the sink as a wave of panic washed over her. For hours, she sat in her room, staring at the test. What was she supposed to do now? She was only 17. She wasn't ready to have a baby. And even if she was, this wasn't just any pregnancy. This was David's child. The thought made her stomach turn. She imagined looking into her baby's face one day and seeing David's features staring back at her. How would she explain that to her mother? To anyone? The weight of the situation pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. That night, she knew she had to tell David. She didn't want to, but she had no choice. When she finally gathered the courage, she found him alone in the living room. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she said, "I took a test." He looked at her, confused at first, but when realization set in, his expression changed. He didn't look angry or shocked. Instead, he sighed heavily, rubbing his face with his hands. "Damn," he muttered. Then, after a long silence, he asked, "How much is it going to cost?" Emily felt her stomach twist. That was his first reaction? Not concern, not regret, just a calculation of how much it would take to make the problem disappear. She had known, deep down, that he wouldn't care, but hearing it out loud still hurt. He said, "I'm sorry," but she didn't believe him. He wasn't sorry, not for what he did, and certainly not for her. She had spent hours thinking about what she wanted, and despite everything, part of her wanted to keep the baby. It didn't make sense, but she couldn't bear the thought of ending the tiny life growing inside her. But would this child ever be happy? Would they ever have a real family? Or would they just be another painful reminder of everything she had suffered? Emily didn't have the answers. All she knew was that she felt completely alone, trapped in a nightmare she didn't know how to escape from. Emily sat alone in her room, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't control. She had always imagined that if she ever got pregnant, it would be under different circumstances. Maybe with someone she loved, someone who was excited to build a future with her. But now, she was carrying the child of the man who had stolen everything from her, and she didn't know what to do. Part of her felt an unexpected attachment to the tiny life growing inside her. It was her first pregnancy, and despite everything, there was a strange sense of wonder in knowing that a part of her existed within her. But then the doubts crept in. Was it selfish to bring this baby into the world? Could she ever truly love a child that might look like him? She thought about what it would mean to have the baby. Her mother would eventually notice, and then she'd have to tell her everything. Would she believe her? Or would she turn against her, blaming her for what had happened? Emily had seen how happy her mother was with David, how she finally seemed to have stability after so many years of struggle. If she told the truth, she would destroy that. Maybe that was why a part of her had let this happen. Maybe, deep down, she had hoped that if she got pregnant, it would end the nightmare. That David would finally back away, that her suffering would have some meaning. But now that it was real, she wasn't so sure. And what about the baby? What kind of life would this child have? Would they grow up without a father? Would they one day ask about him? What could she possibly say? That their father was a man who betrayed them both? That they were the result of something cruel and twisted? The thought made her sick. But the other option, abortion, felt just as unbearable. She had never believed she would be the kind of person to end a life, especially one that was hers. The idea of going to a clinic, of making a decision she could never take back, filled her with guilt. She didn't want to be responsible for taking away a chance at life, but was bringing a baby into a world where they might suffer any better? She thought about David's reaction. He didn't care. He just wanted it to go away. His words still echoed in her mind. How much is it going to cost? He wanted her to erase the problem, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But Emily knew she could never forget. No matter what choice she made, this would stay with her forever. Tears burned in her eyes as she hugged her knees to her chest. She wanted someone to tell her what to do. She wanted to feel like she wasn't completely alone. But in the end, the decision was hers. And no matter what she chose, she knew she would have to live with it for the rest of her life. Emily knew she couldn't keep this secret forever. Every day, the weight of it grew heavier, pressing down on her like an unbearable burden. She wanted to tell her mother, desperately, more than anything, but the thought of it made her stomach twist with fear. What if her mother didn't believe her? What if she looked at her with disgust, with disappointment? What if she blamed her for everything? The idea of seeing that look in her mother's eyes, of hearing the words, "How could you?" was more than she could handle. It was easier to say nothing, to carry the shame alone. She had told David about the pregnancy, and his response had only confirmed what she already knew. He wasn't worried about her. He was worried about himself. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't ask how she felt. He only wanted to know how much it would cost to make the problem disappear. Emily wanted to believe, even just for a second, that some part of him cared. But she knew better. He had never truly cared about her, only about his own secrets staying hidden. She found herself rehearsing the conversation in her head 100 different ways. Would she sit her mother down and tell her everything from the beginning? Would she just blurt it out and get it over with? No matter how she imagined it, she couldn't picture a single scenario where it didn't end in disaster. What if her mother turned against her? What if she called her a liar? Or worse, what if she stayed with David anyway? The thought sent a cold chill through Emily's body. And then there was the baby. Every time she thought she had made a decision, doubt crept in. If she kept the baby, would she be strong enough to raise it alone? Would she ever be able to love a child that reminded her of him? But if she went through with the abortion, could she live with herself? Would she regret it for the rest of her life? It felt like no matter what she chose, she was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. David had made it clear what he wanted. He had already started distancing himself from her, avoiding her whenever he could. It was like he thought that if he ignored the problem long enough, it would just go away. Emily hated him for it, hated how easily he could brush everything aside while she was drowning in it. She wished she could talk to someone, that she had a friend she could confide in. But who would understand? Who could possibly know what it felt like to be in her position? The loneliness was suffocating. She felt like a ghost, moving through the world unseen, carrying a secret too heavy for her to bear. No matter what she decided, one thing was clear: nothing in her life would ever be the same again.